Hi, this is the Social Gelo with Angelo show. My name's Angelo. I'm a social scientist, surfer, martial artist, and a whole lot of other things. Coming to you live from Kasai City, Japan, the Social Gelo with Angelo show.
What's up? And welcome to Social Gelo with Angelo. Today I'm here with Glen Fraticelli and Mitch Powell. And if you followed this show before, you know who these guys are. If this is your first episode, Mitch Powell is the KSDI historian. And Glen Fraticelli is title that you would like to use today, Glen?
Glen first, but I'm the deputy to the chief of KSDI.
All right, good. I would so mess that up if you made me say it, so I'm glad you put it out there. Well, as you saw, the working title for this podcast, I hate to start with an and a vocal audio, but okay, there it is. Yes, I have it right here. Is suggested by Mitch Powell. Joe Emperado becomes co-creator of Kajukenbo. So I'm going to use something like that for the title of it. Find out how will probably be a tag that I put into the post to get people to click on this podcast. So we are bringing attention to the fact that at the last KSDI tournament, great Grandmaster Joe Imperato was promoted. I don't know if promoted is the word. Elevated. Okay, and has the title of co-creator of Kajukenbo. Yes. And we kind of want to talk about, whenever I talked about this to people, because I'll be honest with people listening to this. This isn't the first time. This isn't the first rodeo that Mitch, me, and Glen have had on this topic. and unfortunately, we there is a lost episode out there because of some audio issues. But but something that came up after we did the lost episodes that will never come out, was I talked, people asked me, they really wanted to hear this episode. Like, there was, I'm so excited about this episode. And then I told them, there's audio issues. A lot of stuff came up. They were like, well, wait a second, I thought he was the co-founder. I'm like, no, he's a co-creator. So a lot of people were confused just off that. Well, what do you mean co-founder, co-creator? I thought that was the same thing. So let's just start with that. What do you mean co-founder, co-creator? I thought those were the same thing. What's going on here?
Well, initially the discussion was, as Mitch dives into the history head first, I have to pull him out by his toes sometimes to talk to somebody. And so we discussed history all the time, and we got into the contribution of Joe Imperato many, many times. Along with that, through our time in Kajukenbo, we had the fortunate opportunity to speak directly with some of the pioneers. They too said, yeah, he was the one teaching them, he was the one teaching classes, he was the one working, he even has the forms attributed to him that he created, they're stating. So the idea came up to make him a co-creator. So the co-founders are the ones who kind of had that initial idea, and this is just my talk on it. The initial idea, they came together, they founded this, planted the seed. The seeds were planted, but actually the creation of it came in different iterations through different people. And one of those that needs to be recognized was Joe Directo Imperato. It's kind of my take on why it's a creator. You create it, by the actual techniques, the way of fighting, the concepts, all of that was him and his brother and the others that were around him at the time throughout the years created this art.
You had this basically created in two stages. You had the first stage that everybody's familiar with, 47 to 49. You had Adriano Imperato, Joseph Holt, Peter Chu, Frank Ordonez, George Chang. These guys are training together, and they combine their collective knowledge of karate, judo, jiu-jitsu, kempo, and boxing. And they come up with some techniques that they photograph, they document, and they record these. That's the part that most people recognize as all of Kajukenbo, where we know through our research, that's the founding of it. We don't know how many techniques they came up with, but we know there were enough of them to where they recognize it as a style. It didn't have any forms yet. They had some core techniques that they created. So that group disbands in 49. And then Joe I should say Adriano Imperato, goes out and starts teaching. Eventually, he ends up at the Palama Settlement, and he's teaching in the gym, and he's got his brother as his assistant. He's got Marino Tiwanak, and he's got Woodrow McCandless. They're the next core group. To me, they're as important as the first group. That next group, the McCandless Tiwanak group, Tiwanak is a professional boxer. So he's a very skilled fighter. Woodrow McCandless is a black belt in the Matose line. Joe Imperato and Adriano Imperato are both Chow's guys. They even trained with Chow into the later part of the 50s. Those are the guys that are responsible for the next group. So what Glen points out, he's talking about Joe's contributions. Think about this. He's an instructor at the first school. He's not Adriano, but he's the next guy. They get this school going, and from that school, everything that you see across the world now that has a Kajukenbo name on came from that school. So he's the first assistant instructor. He created forms that are used today in modern Kajukenbo. They're still used. He most likely created techniques, although we don't know how many. He was the co-chief instructor when the art was announced publicly, which was 1957. There's a newspaper article. Adriano Imperato announces Kajukenbo publicly. They're changing the name. And Joe Imperato is listed as the assistant co-chief instructor. I'm sorry, not assistant, co-chief instructor. So there's two chief instructors. There's Adriano and there's Joe. I mean, that right there should tell you something, but you move farther down the line and you get John Leone leaving after Joe Imperato is killed in 1958. John Leone leaves. And then a year later, he's followed by Alejo Reyes and then by Tony Ramos. All three of those guys have said, Joe Imperato was my instructor. Now, they're a big piece of the early Kajukenbo puzzle. They're the pioneers. They're starting the first schools on the mainland. So when you get those folks saying, hey, that was my guy, not that Adriano wasn't, they both taught, but Joe was their teacher as well, maybe even primary teacher in some cases. So if you're trying to figure out how did we get to this point, you have to first acknowledge all that Joe Imperato did in creating the foundation, the new instructors, and what became Kajukenbo, because he was there the entire step of the way.
One.
So to get to the elevation of Joe Imperato, you know, like Glen had mentioned, him and I, we talk a lot, and we've talked for years about this history. And when this really came to light, where we recognized the significant role that Joe Imperato played, it was a dialogue of, okay, now what do we do? So I know back, I have it in my notes, March 3rd, 2020, I wrote a proposal to the KSDI, the Imperato family, that Glen took forward. And in the proposal, I just outlined what we talked about, all the things that he contributed and why we believe he should be elevated to a co-creator status. And Glen, you take it from there, because I'm not quite sure what happened. I just know that it was done.
Yeah, so from there, it was a no-brainer for me, because throughout the years, like I said, with the folks we've spoken to who were actually there, who stated he was there creating and teaching, their main teacher, it was like, this we have to do. I mean, if we didn't, we'd be remiss in just setting history straight as far as putting the proper title on someone who gave just as much or even more than others. And the idea was to elevate him. And when we talk about elevation of rank, when you become, you know, rank is all made up. All this is a human-made idea, you know, whatever rank it is. But common is in an organization, they can elevate, or they do an elevation, just as Cedro was given the rank of 10th degree by KSDI. First, it was the Chinese Cultural Center who recognized him in Kempo, but as far as Kajukenbo, it took the organization to elevate him to that status. So the same organization, the KSDI, we had chosen to, it was a no-brainer. I spoke to almost every senior grandmaster that's living. Before we actually moved forward, I spoke to numerous people about our idea. They said, we have to do this. I presented it to the Imperato family, Senior Grandmaster Dici. It was like, yes, we had, it's about time is what the main thing. So through that and the blessing of his daughter, because I try not to do anything out there with Joe's name or the family's name without blessing from the family. It was something we moved forward to do. So we wanted to put that in the record, in the history, and then tell a story, because what story do we hear? We hear about the fateful night in front of the Pink Elephant, that night on Baratania Street when he got stabbed. That's what you hear. You hear about this, that, whatever. It's just short blurbs, but nothing about the blood, sweat, and tears. When that blood was on the mat that Cedro talked about, more than likely it was Joe's, a little bit of it. He was also taking people out, but this is why. I mean, I'm going to push something up right here. I mean, this is why he was there, man. That was the guy, you know? There's no doubt that the flag behind him only had, I think, 48 stars. You know what I'm saying? It was early on. There weren't 50 stars on that flag. He was there making it happen, learning, teaching. They were figuring it out. You know, even the stances early on, you see the traditional karate stances. And it's moving to these times where, hey, we have to honor him and elevate him to the status which he needs to be at. You know, and I'm glad Mitch planted that seed, pushed it forward. I took it, I was the link, the conduit, and kept making it happen, making everybody knew about it. Everybody gave his blessing, which it didn't matter if they did, blessed it or not, it had to happen because we have the history, right? And people know it. So this is it. And we're very honored to be able to facilitate that.
And then Mitch, you also sent me a picture. If you don't mind, we share it and you kind of talk about it a little bit. You sent me this here too, like some original footage as far as what was going on. Can you explain to the anybody listening who might not have any visuals on this? Can you explain what we're looking at here?
Well, you've got Joe Imperato and his extremely close friend Marino Tijuana training together. So it's from the same core group of photographs that Grandmaster Glen just shared. There's a bunch of photographs out there that are archived. KSDI has access to them. There's a lot more that other people have that unfortunately won't share them.
Yeah.
So we share what we have, but yeah, this is another example of friendships that came out of this. Marino Tijuana was a bad dude. He was a professional fighter. He had a really good record. He if I understand the order correctly, he stopped boxing, he got married, and I guess he decided it was time to do something else. Started training in Kempo with Imperato brothers. And he becomes the actual first black belt under Imperato who trained from white belt up. Joe Imperato was the first black belt, but he was a color belt under Chow. So he's a very important part of this. And, there's some story about how Joe Imperato was going to leave. And I saw some writing from Michael Tijuana, who was Marino Tijuana's son, who is Marino Tijuana's son. And part of the reason was offered that Robert Kawakami came in and co-founded the KSDI with Imperato and was setting up all these different schools and changing their Kempo. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but the two of them were allegedly going to go out on their own. and do their own thing. Only my understanding was because they wanted to do the Kempo aspect of it. I don't know if any of that's true or not. I'm just sharing the stuff that I read. But these guys were that close. Now, they didn't leave. And maybe they would have, I don't know. But Joe was there through May 30th of 1958 as part of Kajukenbo.
Yeah, and you look at that picture there, you look at the hierarchy, you look at the full black gi, you look at the black belt, it's not the transition from white to black, they still wore white gis. If you look at the pictures with all the pioneers or a few of the pioneers in the front, Joe in the back, they're all in black. It's the hierarchy that you're seeing. That he's been there a while, started with Chow, Kempo based. I can't fathom the fact that he would want to leave for any other reason than to start another school of Kajukenbo, right? But, who knows? Who knows what went on? It might have been a passing thing. It might have been a night when brothers just got, bro, I'm leaving now. It could have been one of those things. I'm out of here. It could have been all of that, but if you think of that looks like what, 58 in the picture, right?
Let's go back to that. It said circa 19 here.
That was something I put on there. I'm guessing
you put on there. Oh, okay, you're guessing. Okay.
I'm guessing somewhere around 56. I know he's a black belt. I know Tiwanak's a black belt, and he got his black belt in 55.
Okay, 6. Yeah, I said, no, it looks like he's deep into putting that art together to me. It's just, I don't know. There might have been a little, brotherly falling out for a moment.
If you maybe bringing in Robert Kawakami might have been a catalyst.
Could be.
He's a new guy, new person with new ideas. Not a martial artist.
I wonder when Robert actually got involved. If he was there, I guess when Joe was there, he started, huh? I don't know.
Kawakami's obituary said he was the co-founder of KSDI, and KSDI was in a newspaper in 1957. So I'm going to say he probably came in 57.
I think if we also think about that, they're the co-founder of what, the actual official documentation, when they actually got incorporated, because that's when you start to see his name. Nowhere else have I seen it, but on that actual documentation for
the writing that I saw from Michael Tiwanak was kind of listing Kawakami as the catalyst for why they were leaving. So it had to be before Joe died.
All right. We're kind of, I forgot to mention this first. I'll mention this now. I do have one more guest that I interviewed. So I'm kind of it's a little bit of a different format than what I normally do. But because of where this guest lives, it was really hard to coincide the time zones. He's in Hawaii. So I did, to actually Mitch's advice, he told me I should probably talk to David Tavares, who's also done a lot of research on Joe Imperato. And so I did have him on the show, or on the show kind of. And right now we're just going to bring in some clips that David Tavares said. I forget his title and I'm really bad. Sorry, David. I'm sure you're going to type it in right now or tell me later. But yeah, David Tavares is a Kajukenbo black belt coming out of Hawaii. And he's also the author of a book called Black Rope. That's about Kajukenbo history and Joe Imperato's death. But he talks more about his life in this next clip. So let's just take a look at it real quick, and then Glen and Mitch, when we're done listening, go ahead and chime in on your thoughts on what he says. So here, let's go here, share, and here we go.
What I wanted to cover about Great Grandmaster Joe, he really, his martial arts skills, I like to say was forgotten or lost in time because a lot of people don't know too much about him. It's just that his death and everything like that. But my instructor said he was a very gifted guy. He had different ideas of Kajukenbo, and he was gonna go on his own. This is what my instructor had said. And in fact, Uncle Frank Ordonez, he had mentioned that to me when I interviewed him for my book, and I didn't even bring up the subject, and he just said, yeah, he was leave his brother. And Glen Imperato asked me that, the granddaughter of Cedro, she asked me, what do you think that was? I said, I don't know. It's not that he didn't love his brother. It's just like every, musical artist, when they're in a group, one guy goes off and he does his own thing, does a solo or something, and later on breaks off. So, two great martial artists, but, we'll never know. It's already, history already. So, but he was a great man, and I only ask you to always remember him. We over here, the martial artists in Hawaii, we recognize him and acknowledge him as one of the co-founders of Kajukenbo many years ago. But I'm glad it's official now, and everybody recognizes him as one of the co-founders. And yeah, it's a good thing. I want to congratulate the grandson, Joe, I think is his name, Joe Imperato, or something like that. He's a good Brazilian jiu-jitsu man, from what I understand.
So, any thoughts on this, guys?
Well, I like to share this part here. George Sharonio is one of the instructors under Angelo Imperato. He was there in the 50s, early 50s, mid 50s. And his grandsons are Albert Sadler and Bobby Sharonio Jr. So they're both martial artists. They visit him. They're looking at old photographs, and he points to a photograph that is Marino Tiwanak, Woodrow McCandless, Joe Imperato, and Adriano Imperato. And he says, I hear all the co-founder stuff being said, but those are the real founders of Kajukenbo. And that he told, I believe, to some other people later on. So not just.
I heard it straight from his voice. I sat across and he mentioned that.
So, something like that carries a lot of weight. It's someone that was in that environment with these guys in that arena while Kajukenbo was being created. It was a Kembo system that eventually became Kajukenbo. It didn't come out, you hear people say, oh yeah, Kajukenbo was created in 1947. It wasn't. It was started, the concept was started, but it wasn't created. And an interesting thing, there's that 92 interview with Joseph Hall. And they're talking to him about Kajukenbo and the creation part of it. And he's explaining that he told his son about Kajukenbo later on in life. And he said to his son, his son was now a police officer. His son was getting in trouble. So the son came to him and said, hey, Dad, what do I do? And he said, well, I never really told you this, but, I was a co-creator of Kajukenbo. And he said, I want you to run with this, and I want you to take and make up some techniques. And he said, so I gave him the concepts that we used. And then my son made up techniques, and we use those in our family art. You have to take from that whatever techniques they came up with, they used them based on a set curriculum, a concept of how to create a technique. When I was asking Joe Imperato about the alphabet techniques, he told me how he created those techniques. He wrote it to me. I actually have it in writing. And he was talking about how you have to strike vital areas and the eyes, the side of the neck, the back of the neck, the groin, and so forth. So he explains this concept of how they created techniques. If you understand that concept, you can create your own techniques. And that's what Joe Hoke is saying. Hey, we kept this concept alive, and then my son created these techniques. So it wasn't like they started from scratch. It wasn't that the system was created overnight in 1947. They came up with this concept of how to create techniques, and then they carried that forward.
Mitch, as well as I do, we've both seen, and you actually have, George Sharonio's book where these concepts are actually written. And on it, and they were written by Cedro for him, and on it says black belt, something, I think it's their instructor's manual, right? Handwritten, pictures. You see a few blocks in this now, but it's all concepts that were created through the art. Some are straight from the streets. Some are just like, oh, that's brutal. But some were coming down from various arts. It's the plate lunch, right? I always look at Kajukenbo like this. Kajukenbo is the plate lunch of martial arts. And if you're from Hawaii, you understand it's the best from here, the best from there, best from here. You put it all together. But hey, tomorrow I might not have the Kobe beef. I might have chicken, but it's still good. So it's not about the technique all the way. It's that concept behind it, right? It's that, I mean, we could go through concepts that Mitch and I trained early on because they were still being taught and discuss it with folks who are just learning, and they could go through all the forms and opinions they want. But then when you say, hey, let's talk about a concentration breath, let's inhale, retain ki. They wouldn't know how to do it, wouldn't know what it is. It's written in Sijo's book way back when. We practice it in our school 1,000 times a month, but it's basically how to take a hit and how to give a hit with using that breath. So, you know, I mean, concepts. I mean, that's a whole other thing Mitch and I have been talking about lately. Also,
well, I think actually you're on a good point here because and I think we're gonna bring in David because that's one of the things that I mentioned to David as far as one of the concepts of Kajukenbo that I really enjoyed. When I first came in and saw a Kajukenbo class and saw what they were doing and was trying to differentiate what's the difference between this and these other people that say they do Kempo and these other people that say they do karate in my neighborhood, like, and the guys that say they do Kung Fu, what's the difference? And when I came and saw this concept, I was like, oh, that's very different from what these other traditional schools are doing. I'm just gonna bring this in real quick, guys. Here, bear with me. Here, and all right. Well, so another point that we talked about on our last podcast was about how, and you know, I have a background in MMA, and one of the things that really attracted me to Kajukenbo was the ground and pound. Like, went to a lot of different schools, and when I saw what they were doing with ground and pound, I really liked the style of their ground and pound. And you mentioned last time, and we kind of talked about it briefly, about how it was actually Joe Imperato who brought in the idea of a ground and pound. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Uncle Frank had mentioned that to me when I was interviewing him. He said it was Joe. It was his idea instead of the old karate style, the one hit, one kill. You know, Joe believed, you know, if you missed the guy while he was on the ground, you know, you keep following up until you get the job done. So that what they call, you know, like in MMA now or UFC or whatever, you know, ground and pound. That's Joe Emperato's Kajukenbo back in 1947. So this guy was light years ahead of his time. You know, he was an innovator. So, you know, I'm really proud, you know, of that. And I think the people in Kajukenbo should know that, you know, if they missed your last podcast from way back, but I'm glad you brought it up now. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, you guys want to add to that?
Well, you know, there's a lot to say about that, right? So absolutely, ground and pound came from the Imperato brothers, and they were the streets, right? So I'm thinking now, while you're saying that, I'm thinking back on some of Sijo's writing in his biography he wrote that never was published or anything. You know, it's all broken English. It's really nice reading. But he talks about him and Joe down shining shoes. Somebody snatched the money from Joe. Sijo showed up. Bottom line, he took this guy out. The guy went down, and he gave him the shoe job. Now, back in those days, 40s, 50s, you understand what a shoe job was. I am kicking you, stomping you, and beating you while you're on the ground. That's the shoe job. You know, so yeah, it was part of his DNA. Him, Sijo, I mean, that's how they fought in the streets. Whose idea was? Yeah, who knows? But it's valid. It's valid, and that's that streetwise that the brothers had.
Well, I got that interview that I just got through watching about 4 million times is the 92 interview with Hulk, Imperato, and Peter Chu. And in that interview, Hulk was talking about Imperato, and he's telling Vince Black, the interviewer, what a fantastic street fighter Adriano Imperato was. So I got a note here, Joe Imperato. In 1950, a guy tried to pull a knife on him outside that same bar area. And Joe put that guy in the hospital. I have the newspaper clipping from that. These guys were street fighters. So if Joe Imperato implemented that, as Frank Wardenez says, what I will say is he was not afraid to take the street to the mat. Where someone like Joe Hoke would have never done that. Joe Hoke was a classic trained martial artist who really cared about like the goodness of the art, the goodness of the people training in the art. It was a big thing for him to bring a moralistic view to training. So the flip side of that is an Imperato. We live and die on the street. We're going to bring that into school. I was talking to Joe Hoke's son, Barry, and he said that his understanding was in 51, his father came back from the military. He saw Imperato teaching a class, and afterward realized Imperato had completely changed their philosophy from kind of the good-natured, moralistic view that Hoke thought they were going to do. And he created a street fighting system. And Hoke said, I don't want to be part of that. So when people say, how or why did they split up? Well, they split up because guys were in the military doing military duties, but they came back from the military and they could have resumed. Hoke did not resume his role because Imperato had made this a street fighting art. So whether or not Joe did it or Adriano did it or a collection of ideas, somebody said, hey, let's bring the street to this map. And let's train like we're out there and we're gonna die if we don't do this right. So that's kind of Kajukenbo's MO. When people see the systems and they go, hey, what's the difference between Kempo and Kajukenbo? In the Kempo systems, we do the same hand strikes, we do the same blocks, we do the same kicks, but then we drag you to the ground and beat you for 14 minutes. So other systems don't do that part, man. Now they call it MMA.
Here's the thing, though. Now they call it MMA, kind of, right? Because, and I'll put this in here. This is going to give me more work later, but if you want to see, I'm going to put this in here later. The What is Kajukenbo interview I did with John Hackelman and also Ron Esteller. They both talk about how MMA, and they both run schools that have MMA fighters, right? Big props to Glover and his win, and now his title defense coming up. Or no, he lost, and now he's gonna get a rematch. And some more people from the Pit Ohana that are making huge moves in the UFC. But even their original coach Hackelman says Kajukenbo guy, a true Kajukenbo guy, would have a horrible time in the cage because half the stuff that he could do, he can't do in the cage. He has to adapt. And you're good at that. And obviously his system shows that we can adapt. But he says he's gonna stomp on you. That's the first thing he says. He's gonna, well, you just said the street jump. He's gonna stomp on you. And he was talking about how MMA is still different from Kajukenbo. There's concepts there, but there's stuff that we do, that we train in, that we're not allowed to do in the cage.
Joe's golden target, written in George Sorono's black belt book, groin shot. That is a place you want to hit fast, hit hard. The idea, and Tony Ramos told me, Tony Ramos told me this one day. He says, I want to hit that bugger so hard anywhere that his knees buckle, and then I'll take him down. He goes, it doesn't matter where I hit him, I'm going to stun him. He goes, it just crack him so hard. And it's the difference, Kempo and Kajukenbo. It's like, I'm going to give you 2 to 3 good hits. One of them is going to stun you so hard. The other 2 are going to be swinging in the air because you're on your way down, and I'm stomping. So, there's a different concept. It goes always back to that. And Joe was involved with that, and you see some of the pictures of him, and his movements. These moves are not the traditional. That one, I put this one up here. And if you've seen that, that's the same one you put. But look what's moving, right? He's got the leg up. He's got that arm hammer fist. He's coming in for definitely a takedown. And, I know that's not all out, but I guarantee, even when they train, it was hitting. It was hitting all on all gears.
And what I want to mention is, and I know we're gonna get right back to more of this. But one thing I want to mention, because I've been doing I've been doing a lot of my own research into the creations of the UFC and its evolution from where it started to where it is at now. A great book people should check out is Blood in the Cage, written by L. John Worthing. It goes over the story of Pat Miletich and the rise of the UFC. And one thing he mentions is that in those first 5-6 UFCs, when it was still being ran by the Gracies,
Yeah.
and they still allowed growing shots,
Yeah.
the political climate, one of the biggest issues that the politicians had with the UFC was the no holds bar type of fighting that was happening. And the only way the UFC was finally, because there was just they took it off pay-per-view, man. They were letting people watch porn and not UFC. That's how bad
it was banned from state.
like,
Except for Las Vegas.
Yeah, that's how bad they thought it was. And when you look at those original rule sets, they allowed stomping, they allowed hair pulling. They said the marketing people were saying, we just can't market this as it just looks like a blood sport. You guys are pulling out clumps of hair, and it looked a lot. And at that point, there were Kajukenbo guys involved the whole time. All right, so like if you look at the history, you talk to people, you'll find out that Kajukenbo guys have been involved in that the whole time. But one of the things when they made the sanctions, and they said the only way we can get the boxing commissions that were in charge of this and the politicians behind it is if we can finally add these rules that make it less of a brutal street art or street thing and make it more palatable for the public, is if we take out the hair pulling, the growing strikes. And they did that in the early UFC to help with the fallback from the politicians at the time. So I think it's really interesting, like when you kind of see these histories interweaving like that. And I don't want to divert from what we're talking about, but yeah.
Right. There's another piece of that should be shared, though. There was one camp that said we need to do it on cement, not on a mat. Because if you're on a mat, you have no problems falling on the ground, rolling around on your back and grabbing a hold of some guy's legs. But you're not going to intentionally go on the ground if the ground's hard, cement, etc. So just imagine what the UFC would look like today if they fought that in a street and not some design.
No, it wouldn't be around. It was almost not around with it was
completely
not around with everything we just talked about. It was almost destroyed. Like it wasn't until they came up with the sanctions that they were actually able to make it what it is now. It's a great sport. I'm a big fan of it, but it wouldn't have been that if they would have kept it that way. But again, this goes to the point of what we're talking about Kajukenbo and those different
street fighting art.
Yeah, as a street fighting art, and
not a ring art.
I'm trying to act like we're trying, and I know people trying to act like badass. I mean, beyond just the growing strikes, little subtleties like grabbing a T-shirt, right? In MMA, you're not allowed to grab a T-shirt. I was shocked by this. The first time I actually went to an MMA school, a guy tried to mount me, and I grabbed his rash guard and pulled it over his head and started popping him, and they start saying, "Whoa!" Like the whole Black Panther scene. We don't do that here. So, I mean, again, little subtleties. Yeah, we can strike to the growing. We say that a lot, but there's like little subtleties that I would think these guys are so tough that they do. But yeah, again, this is just to speak to those subtleties and those differences between MMA and Kajukenbo that are all going back to the history of these badasses, Joe Imperato and Angelo Imperato. Now, let's go ahead and switch gears here real quick. If you guys are cool with this, David Tavares speaks a little bit about after Joe passed away and the ceremony. Is it cool if we take a look at that clip real quick?
Sure.
Okay. Let's go ahead and bring that up. All right. So David speaks a little bit about the funeral services. So I'm just gonna bring it in here real quick, guys. Do you see this? Are we all on the same page?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
His funeral services were held at St. Teresa Church. It was, I believe, on a Wednesday morning, and then they walked. It was said somebody sent me a letter saying that the Kajukenbo students, they all walked from St. Teresa Church all the way to the Nuuanu Memorial Park, which is quite a distance away. But how
this photo you sent me here, how is this related to that walk you were talking about?
Well, no, that was when they got to the Memorial Park Nuuanu mortuary. But I'm glad you brought that up, because the pallbearers there is a question. They said that the pallbearers were Charles Lakalu, who's that gentleman to the left, and then right behind me was Walter Godine. And in fact, they said that, my instructor never showed up because he felt guilty, but that's my instructor right there. And then behind him is Gabby Iona. And then they said the others were Sid Assumption, hold on a second, Henry Mandak, and there's one more guy, Big Ben Kekulu. Okay, but see that guy on the right there? That's Sid Assumption. He's not holding on to any of the casket there. Okay, now if you look to the left again at Charles Lakalu, okay, you can see an arm there with a glove. Okay, that guy there on that right was Frank Swan. That was one of Marino Tilinak's black belts. And so I think that there were Sid and Frank were escorting him, and then there were the other 6. Okay, so there's a missing pallbearer that who's not holding. So one Kajukenbo instructor had told me that it could be Marino Tillanak, but I asked Michael Tillanak, and Michael Tillanak said, "No, I think my father was a pallbearer." So if anybody knows out there for that 6th pallbearer, because they said it was Charles Lakalu, Walter Goodine, Gabby Iona, Henry Mandak, Big Ben Kekulu, and Sid Assumption. But I mean, if you look, Sid he's not holding on to the handle of that casket. So yeah, those are the 6 pallbearers, and there could be one more out there. Somebody knows. If they know, please let Angelo know, and he can put on one of his shows in the future.
Yeah. So I remember. So again, I wasn't there. So I guess there was a really big ceremony. From what I heard, I did hear some. I mean, no one that was actually there, but the legends, as you will, that I heard from my instructor was there was this huge ceremony, and a lot of different masters and grandmasters from all kinds of arts were there. And there was also obviously a procession with black belts, and there's the white geese you guys were talking about, carrying Joe. Anything
real quick, you mentioned the white geese. As a lot of people have heard, and we all know, the white gi was not on your black belt level. And what I hear was a lot of those folks were given black belts to wear during the ceremony. And I also heard that a lot of them didn't give them back. They just kept wearing them. But I mean, you look at all these black belts all of a sudden, but I don't think if you look at the duration of training and the time and where Joe was, that they had that many promoted to black belt as of yet. It wasn't there, but the story is, give him black belts because no one's going to carry my brother's or be a pallbearer without having a black belt. And then I'm promoted now.
He gave you the black belt.
Not sure, but that's kind of like what I heard.
When you can get it back.
And they all look new. If you look at them, they look very new.
Yeah, I know one guy he started his training in 1957. So this is May of 58. And I know he didn't get a black belt in a year and 4 months.
And another thing that's really cool, and I don't know if I mentioned it to you, Mitch. Senior Grandmaster Dici told me a story that after all of this happened, they had one of his geese, Joe's geese, they rolled it up, they brought it to Palama Settlement, and they buried it under the stairs at Palama Settlement. The place they buried it is no longer there, but she said, yeah, we took it and we gave him his place because that's where they trained. It's pretty cool.
That's really cool. Well, we're almost close to our wrap up, guys. And before I wrap up, David had some thank yous he wanted to give out. So we're going to go into David's wrap up. And then there's a tribute I have to do as mentioned off camera that I'll do. And then we'll do our wrap up. So let me line this up. Hold on a second. All right. So I know I flashed my hands in because I probably shouldn't have done that. I don't feel like editing that out. So y'all have to deal with that. So let's go ahead and go to David's wrap up. And here we are. So let's check out what he said. So looking over everything, man. Any last comments you want to make?
Yeah, I want to thank all my friends, my martial arts. Well, I want to thank my family here in Hawaii, both Tavares and Dennison, who always supported me when I did my martial arts. They believed in me more than I believed in myself. But I also want to thank all my martial arts brothers and sisters, Tommy Lamb of the Kempo Unlimited schools. When my school, folded up and it went tits up, he let me still train at his school. I learned a lot. I learned more from him than he ever did from me when I was one of his Kempo instructors. He made me more knowledgeable martial artist, better martial artist, and I believe a better man. I thank him and the Kempo Unlimited family. Thank you for letting me be in your Kempo family all these past 26 years. And I can never. I'll always be indebted to that. And I want to thank 10th degree great grandmaster Jason Groff, who's the only successor to a co-founder of the Kajukenbo system. He's a successor to Uncle Frank. He helped me a lot, and Ron Baker, 8th degree professor Ron Baker, a big thanks to all of them people. They're all my friends, and they helped me through some difficult times that I have right now. But I'll be back, and I'll be back ready to train again and do what I like doing. Thank you, Angelo.
No problem, brother. Thank you so much for coming on the show and just dropping some knowledge and your experiences and all that research you did. And I encouraged all my listeners, if you're a Kajukenbo practitioner, there are 2 books out. There aren't 2 books. Okay, I'm going to stop myself right there. Mitch, how many books?
It's not a lot. I mean, John Bishop has this one and this one. The Black Robe, which is Grandmaster David Tavares' book. Mike Whittle has a nice book out there. There's not a lot of books on Kajukenbo.
Okay, so I wasn't wrong. It's like 5 about.
There's a couple other ones. There's an older one. I can't think of the title right now.
Right. So there's a few.
Frank Conway wrote it.
So I want to correct myself before someone jumps in the comments and corrects me. You should have the one written by John Bishop, and definitely the one written by David Tavares. He goes into great detail about some Kajukenbo history that I had no idea even existed. So I really appreciate you coming in and clearing that up, brother.
All right, thanks, man. But like I said, this is for all the young black belts out there in Kajukenbo, because they're the future, man. They're the guys that are gonna. I want them to pass it on to their students and to anybody in their school. Joe is a great man, and they should be proud that they officially recognize him as one of the co-founders. Well, but again, thanks. Aloha.
Thank you, man. And for my listeners, thank you very much, and stay tuned for the wrap up that we're about to do with Glen and Mitch. So another thing we should clear up, co-creator, and we talked about that earlier in our podcast. Now, one more thing that I'm supposed to mention. I'm gonna go here to my email. Hopefully nobody hacks in because I'm showing you private information. Is that David did ask that I please share this photo of his dog that recently passed away. Because he trained with this before he went to Japan to fight. This dog ran with him, and he ran with this dog. He told me he ran with this dog every day while he was cutting weight, and he would visit Joe's grave on his run, and this dog was with him. So it meant a lot to him, and he asked me to please put his contributions to this podcast and tribute it to his dog. All right. Anything else you guys want to add?
I do want to say, we honor Joe Imperato this way, but we need to honor him by telling his story. telling all aspects of the story beyond just the death, before, after. We also need to really thank Joe Imperato, is his blood and her blessings to allow us, and always honor her when we speak of Joe in the highest degree. But from the KSDI, the Kajukenbo Self-Defense Institute, we definitely want to honor those who came before us and created our art. Never let their legacy die. And I think Mitch Powell, he is the official KSDI historian. Just the deep dives he's doing is amazing. We have our podcast that will be coming, Kajukenbo Talk Story, where we'll get into super details on the subject and many others. My shameless plug and my dog.
And your dog. Yeah.
I think you got to look at how did they even get there. The Imperato brothers had a rough haul, man. They're Depression era babies. A lot of issues growing up with the families, some divorces and no money. Their kids, I think Joe's 11 and Adriano's 13, 14. And there's a bomb dropped on Pearl Harbor, bombs dropped on Pearl Harbor, changing the lives of, millions of people all around the world. And they lived right through that stuff. And then they get a little bit older and, Cedro goes off in the military. So Joe is, he's a teenager, man. He's the man of the house. The challenges that these guys went through are extraordinary. Most people would not have made it. And you're looking at a martial art that is done, I seriously, all around the world, that came out of, these two, the founding portion and then the creating portion of the art. It came out of those two separate periods. And look what they created. And these guys were not old wise masters. The first group, they were in their early 20s, and then CJ was a little bit older within the next group, but Joe was not. He was a young man. He was only 28 years old when he died. What a life lived, man. They did a lot of living. He did in 28 years.
You know what they say, when it comes down to it and you need to use the art for self-defense, I'd rather learn it from the streets and the way it should be than, those who went through the motions, and those guys lived it.
I want to add that I too have a dog, but my dog is in this little canister here because my dog was a 3.5-pound Chihuahua. This is Princess, who lived almost 17 years. So
love our dogs.
God bless all the dogs around there.
While we're doing this, I'm gonna just go ahead and throw it out there too. Here's my dogs. They both passed away this year. He passed away at 18. Made it to 18.
Wow.
Surprise. Boxer made it to 12 years. I thought for sure. They told me 5 years in it wasn't gonna make. Most boxers don't live past 5 years because of genetic issues, I guess, cancer and stuff. But yeah, 12 years.
Wow.
And dogs are part of Ohana. You know what I mean? Like, I think David did touch on a good point. He was running with his dog. I ran with my dogs. Like, my training, they're part of family, and like I think that's what makes Kajukenbo so.
So when I was running my school out of my house way back in the day, this dog used to love to bite the guys when they walked out of the garage to go into the bathroom. And there were times off of people's ankles. So I'll never forget that. That stuff was fun.
Yeah, you love your dogs.
Well, everyone, thank you for checking out Social Gelo. Mitch, Glen, thank you for taking the time and rearranging the time and rescheduling the time. I'm glad we finally got together and did it. And for all of you listening, thanks for following the show.
Right, thanks, Angelo.
Thanks, brother.
Catch y'all later.